They said she was too small, too weak, too soft for the brutal world of underground fighting. But when Zara Nakamura stepped onto the blood-stained concrete floor of the abandoned warehouse, barefoot and determined, she would prove them all devastatingly wrong. This is the story of how a 19-year-old girl from the slums of Neo-Bangkok became the most feared fighter in the underground circuit, earning her victories, not despite her bare feet, but because of them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The warehouse reeked of sweat, cigarette smoke, and the metallic tang of spilled blood. Neon lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows across the faces of hardened criminals, desperate gamblers, and thrill-seekers who had gathered for another night of illegal fighting. The crowd was restless, their voices creating a cacophony of bets being placed and predictions being made. Most of the money was riding on Kazuki the Hammer Tanaka, a mountain of a man whose fists had sent dozens of opponents to the hospital. But tonight was different. Tonight they had a newcomer. Zara stood in the makeshift corner that served as her prep area, her bare feet planted firmly on the cold concrete. She wore simple black shorts and a fitted tank top, her long black hair braided back to keep it out of her face. What immediately caught everyone's attention wasn't her clothing or her slight 5'4" frame, it was the complete absence of shoes, gloves, or any protective gear whatsoever. "Look at this joke," sneered Tommy Chen, one of the regular promoters, as he gestured toward Zara. "Management's really scraping the bottom of the barrel now. What's next? Sending in children." His comment drew cruel laughter from the nearby spectators, who were already writing her off as easy prey. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The betting board reflected their sentiment. Odds against Zara were 50-1, the worst anyone had seen in years. Even the bookies seemed embarrassed to offer such astronomical odds, but the crowd was eating it up. Money flowed freely as veteran fighters and seasoned gamblers placed their bets against the barefoot girl, who looked more like she belonged in a college classroom than a fighting ring. "She doesn't even have proper footwear," observed Marcus Wong, a former champion, who now worked as a commentator for the underground streams. "In a sport where every advantage matters, where fighters spend thousands on custom boots for grip and protection, she's chosen to go completely bare. It's either supreme confidence or complete insanity." Zara could hear every whisper, every laugh, every dismissive comment. She had heard them all before. In the dojos where masters refused to train her seriously, in the gyms where other fighters treated her like a mascot, in the streets where people assumed she was just another lost kid from the slums. But tonight all of that would change. The underground fighting circuit of Neo-Bangkok was no place for the weak or naive. It had evolved from the ancient art of Muay Thai, but without rules, regulations, or mercy. Fighters came here when they had nowhere else to go, when they were too brutal for sanctioned competitions, too desperate for normal jobs, or too hungry for the kind of money that only life or death combat could provide. The warehouse rotated locations weekly to avoid police raids, but the core community remained the same, predators and prey, with very little middle ground. Zara's opponent was studying her from across the ring, his massive frame making her look even smaller by comparison. Kazuki the Hammer Tanaka had earned his nickname through sheer destructive power. His record was impressive and terrifying, 23 wins, 22 by knockout, with several opponents requiring extended hospital stays. He specialized in overwhelming his adversaries with pure brute force, using his 240-pound frame like a human wrecking ball. The crowd began to chant his name as he shadowboxed, his heavy boots thudding against the concrete with each movement. The sound echoed through the warehouse like a drumbeat, a rhythmic reminder of the punishment those feet could deliver. His supporters held up signs and placed last-minute bets, confident that this would be another quick night's work for their champion. But Zara remained perfectly still, her bare feet seemingly rooted to the ground as she centered herself. Those who looked closely might have noticed the calluses on her soles, evidence of years spent training on rough surfaces. They might have observed the way her toes flexed and gripped the concrete, providing a connection to the ground that no boot could replicate. They might have seen the quiet confidence in her dark eyes, the kind that came not from bravado but from hard-earned knowledge. The referee, a a grizzled former fighter named Santos, called both competitors to the center of the makeshift ring. The crowd noise reached a fever pitch as the two faced each other, David and Goliath in the modern age, except this David carried no stones, only the weapons that nature had given her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Santos announced into a crackling microphone, "tonight we have a special treat." In the red corner, weighing 127 pounds, fighting out of the Riverside district, the newcomer, Zara Barefoot Nakamura. The response was a mixture of boos and laughter, with very few genuine cheers. Growing up in the sprawling slums of Riverside district, Zara Nakamura learned to fight before she learned to read. The cramped apartments and narrow alleys of her neighborhood were a daily battleground where only the strong survived, and the weak became victims of circumstance, crime, or both. Her mother Keiko worked 3 jobs just to keep them fed, leaving Zara to navigate the dangerous streets alone from an early age. The first lesson came when she was 7 years old. Walking home from the community center where free meals were served to local children, Zara encountered a group of older boys who had cornered a younger child near the abandoned playground. The victim was crying, his small hands clutching a torn backpack, while his attackers demanded whatever money or food he might have. Most children would have walked away, but something deep inside Zara refused to let her feet carry her past the injustice. "Leave him alone," she said, her young voice barely carrying over the sounds of distant traffic. The boys turned to look at her, ranging in age from 10 to 12, all of them significantly larger than her slight frame. Their leader, a thick-set boy named Daisuke, laughed at the interruption. "Mind your business, little girl, unless you want to join him," Daisuke threatened, but Zara stepped forward instead of backing down. What happened next would become legendary in the neighborhood. Using instincts she didn't know she possessed, Zara ducked under Daisuke's swing and kicked him hard in the shin with her bare foot. When he doubled over in pain, she grabbed his hair and drove her knee into his face, breaking his nose and sending him sprawling. The other boys fled, leaving their leader bleeding on the concrete. From that day forward, Zara Nakamura became known as someone you didn't mess with, despite her size and age. But more importantly, she discovered something about herself that would shape her entire future. She was born to fight. Her mother initially tried to discourage this aggressive behavior, fearing it would lead Zara down the same dark path that had claimed so many neighborhood children. But when local gang members began approaching Zara to recruit her as muscle for their operations, Keiko realized that her daughter's fighting ability needed proper direction rather than suppression. The solution came in the form of Master Chen, an elderly martial arts instructor who ran a small dojo above a noodle shop in the market district. Chen had been watching Zara's street fights for months, noting her natural timing, balance, and fearlessness. When Keiko approached him about training her daughter, he agreed to take Zara on as a student, but only under one condition: she would train exactly as the ancient warriors did, without modern equipment or protective gear. True martial arts comes from the body and spirit, not from tools and technology. Master Chen explained during Zara's first lesson. If you depend on shoes for balance, gloves for protection, or equipment for strength, you will never truly know your own capabilities. This philosophy would prove controversial as Zara progressed through her training. Other students at the dojo, particularly the male fighters, constantly questioned why she was allowed to spar without proper protective gear. They argued that it was dangerous, impractical, and would leave her at a disadvantage in real competition. But Master Chen stood firm in his methods, and the results spoke for themselves. Within 6 months, Zara was defeating students who had been training for years. Her bare feet allowed her to feel every shift in her opponent's weight, every vibration through the floor that telegraphed their intentions. Without gloves, her hands developed incredible striking power and precision. Without protective headgear, she learned to avoid being hit rather than simply absorbing punishment. The other significant influence in Zara's development came from an unexpected source: her grandmother, who had passed away when Zara was 12. Obesan had been a dancer in her youth, performing traditional folk dances that required incredible balance, grace, and connection to the earth. Before her death, she spent countless hours teaching Zara these ancient movements, emphasizing the importance of being grounded both physically and spiritually. Your feet are your connection to the world. Obasan would say as they practiced on the apartment's tiny balcony. Through them you can feel the earth's energy, predict your opponent's movements, and find strength that boots and shoes will steal from you. These lessons, combined with Master Chen's martial arts training, created a unique fighting style that no traditional school could replicate. By age 16, Zara had outgrown the local dojo and began seeking out underground tournaments and street fights throughout Neo-Bangkok. She won consistently, but always faced the same prejudices and assumptions. Promoters treated her like a sideshow attraction, opponents underestimated her capabilities, and spectators came to watch her lose rather than win. The pattern was always the same: initial mockery, followed by shock, then respect. But respect was temporary, and each new venue brought fresh skepticism about the barefoot girl who claimed she could fight with the best of them. Traditional martial arts schools refused to accept her unconventional methods, professional fighting organizations deemed her equipment choices too dangerous for sanctioned competition, and even underground circuits sometimes questioned whether allowing her to compete was ethical or safe. But Zara persisted, driven by something deeper than just a desire to win. Each victory was a statement, a declaration that strength came in forms that people didn't expect or understand. Every time someone said she couldn't compete with real fighters, she proved them wrong. Every prediction of her failure became motivation to succeed. Now standing in this warehouse preparing for the biggest fight of her career, all of those years of training, struggle, and doubt had led to this moment. The crowd saw a small girl without proper equipment facing an experienced killer. What they couldn't see was the warrior that hardship, determination, and unconventional training had forged. Master Chen's dojo was unlike any other training facility in Neo-Bangkok. Located above Mrs. Liu's noodle shop in the crowded market district, it could barely accommodate 12 students at once, and its equipment consisted mainly of worn punching bags, traditional wooden training posts, and mirrors that had seen better decades. But what made it truly unique was Chen's philosophy regarding natural fighting versus modern competitive martial arts. The human body is already perfect, Chen would explain to new students, his weathered hands gesturing toward ancient scrolls that depicted warriors training on mountainsides and in forests. For thousands of years, fighters developed their skills without fancy equipment, protective gear, or specialized footwear. They learned to move like water, strike like lightning, and root themselves to the earth like ancient trees. Modern fighters have forgotten these fundamental truths. When Zara first arrived at the dojo at age 8, she was immediately drawn to these teachings. Unlike other students who complained about the lack of modern equipment, she embraced the minimalist approach. While her classmates wore protective headgear during sparring, Zara learned to slip punches entirely. While they relied on padded gloves to absorb the impact of their strikes, she developed precision and control that made every technique devastatingly effective. The bare feet training was particularly revolutionary. Master Chen explained that feet were humanity's original connection to the earth's energy, and that covering them with artificial materials disrupted this natural flow. "Watch a cat stalking its prey," he would say during footwork drills. "Notice how its paws grip and release with each step, feeling for texture, stability, and opportunity. Shoes make humans clumsy and disconnected." To prove his point, Chen would demonstrate advanced techniques that were impossible to perform while wearing traditional footwear. He could grip smooth surfaces with his toes, providing stability during complex kicks and throws. He could feel his opponent's weight shifts through vibrations in the floor, allowing him to counter attacks before they were fully committed. Most impressively, he could generate incredible striking power by allowing his feet to naturally expand and grip the ground during impact. Zara absorbed these lessons with the intensity of someone who understood that her survival might depend on them. Growing up in Riverside District meant that every trip to school, every visit to the market, and every walk home after dark could potentially become a life-or-death situation. The skills she learned at Chen's dojo weren't just for sport or competition, they were practical tools for navigating a dangerous world. The training regimen was brutal by any standard. Each session began with meditation, helping students develop the mental clarity necessary for real combat. This was followed by conditioning exercises that would have seemed excessive in most modern gyms, Barefoot runs across gravel and broken concrete, striking practice against wooden posts without gloves or padding, and balance drills performed on narrow beams and unstable surfaces. But the most challenging aspect of Zara's training was learning to fight multiple opponents simultaneously. Master Chen believed that real combat rarely involved fair one-on-one encounters, so he regularly arranged scenarios where Zara faced 2, 3, or even 4 opponents at once. These exercises taught her to use mobility and positioning rather than pure strength, to create opportunities rather than wait for them, and to end fights quickly before becoming overwhelmed. The other students initially viewed Zara's rapid progress with suspicion and resentment. Here was a young girl who had started training years after them, yet she was consistently defeating fighters with more experience and size advantages. Some attributed her success to luck or favoritism from Master Chen. Others claimed that her unconventional methods were somehow cheating or unsporting. These attitudes came to a head during a particularly intense sparring session when she was 14. Takeshi, a 17-year-old student who had been training for 4 years, became frustrated after Zara defeated him in 3 consecutive matches. In front of the other students, he accused her of fighting dirty and demanded that she use proper equipment like everyone else. "She's not really winning," Takeshi argued loudly. "She's just using tricks that wouldn't work in a real fight. Let's see how good she is when she can't rely on her bare feet and has to fight like a normal person." Master Chen allowed this challenge to proceed, but with one modification: both fighters would compete under Zara's preferred conditions. No gloves, no protective gear, and no shoes. Within 30 seconds, Takeshi was on the ground with a dislocated shoulder, finally understanding that Zara's advantages came not from trickery, but from superior skill and conditioning. The transition from dojo training to real-world application began when Zara turned 15 and started working part-time at the Riverside Night Market to help support her mother. The bustling marketplace operated from sunset until dawn, serving workers from the nearby factories and docks who needed hot meals, cheap goods, and sometimes entertainment after long shifts. It was here that Zara first encountered the underground fighting scene that would eventually lead her to tonight's confrontation. Working at her aunt's food stall meant carrying heavy pots of soup and rice across uneven concrete surfaces, navigating crowded aisles filled with aggressive customers, and occasionally dealing with drunken troublemakers who thought a teenage girl was an easy target for harassment or theft. These daily challenges provided practical application for everything Master Chen had taught her, but they also revealed gaps in her training that only real-world experience could fill. The first serious test came on a rainy Thursday evening when 3 factory workers, emboldened by cheap alcohol and peer pressure, decided to cause trouble at her aunt's stall. They knocked over a display of bowls, spilled soup across the counter, and demanded free food while making increasingly crude comments about Zara's appearance. When she politely asked them to leave, their behavior escalated to physical intimidation. "What are you going to do about it, little girl?" the largest one asked, stepping close enough that she could smell the alcohol on his breath. His companions flanked her from both sides, blocking potential escape routes while other market vendors pretended not to notice the confrontation. This was exactly the type of multiple opponent scenario Master Chen had prepared her for, but experiencing it with real stakes felt completely different from dojo practice. What followed lasted less than 20 seconds but changed everything. Using her bare feet for silent movement, Zara positioned herself so that the 3 men were aligned in a straight line rather than surrounding her. When the leader reached out to grab her arm, she used his momentum against him, stepping aside and driving her elbow into his solar plexus. As he doubled over gasping, she pivoted and struck the second attacker with a palm strike to the nose, sending him stumbling backward into vendor stalls. The third man tried to grab her from behind, but Zara dropped low and swept his legs with her bare foot, sending him crashing to the wet concrete. Before any of them could recover, she had grabbed a heavy soup ladle and made it clear that continued aggression would result in serious injury. The 3 workers retreated quickly, leaving Zara standing in the aftermath of her first real street fight. Word from this incident spread quickly through the night market community, but not in the way Zara expected. Rather than earning respect or recognition, she found herself labeled as dangerous and unpredictable. Some vendors appreciated having protection from troublemakers, but others worried that her presence might escalate minor conflicts into serious violence. This reaction taught her an important lesson about how society viewed women who could defend themselves effectively. The real change came when Marcus Santos, a former underground fighter who now worked as a middleman for various illegal enterprises, witnessed her handling another group of troublemakers the following month. Santos had been involved in Neo-Bangkok's underground fighting circuit for over a decade, first as a competitor and later as a talent scout for promoters looking for fresh fighters to feed their events. "I've been watching you," Santos said after approaching her stall late one evening. "You move differently than most street fighters. Someone taught you properly, but you've adapted it for real situations. That's rare." He explained that there was a world beyond street altercations where fighters could earn serious money by using their skills in organized, albeit illegal, competitions. The underground circuit operated in warehouses, abandoned buildings, and private clubs throughout the city, hosting events for wealthy spectators who craved entertainment that sanctioned sports couldn't provide. Fighters came from diverse backgrounds, former professionals seeking easy money, street fighters looking for bigger stages, martial artists rejected by traditional organizations, and occasionally, young talents like Zara who needed opportunities that the mainstream world wouldn't offer. Santos explained that the circuit was always looking for interesting matchups and unique fighters who could draw crowds and generate betting interest. A teenage girl who fought Barefoot would certainly qualify as unique, but she would need to prove herself against legitimate competition before earning opportunities at major events. "There's a small tournament next week," Santos offered. "Low-level stuff, mostly newcomers and washouts, but it's a chance to see if you can handle real fighters instead of drunk factory workers. You interested?" Zara's first underground fight took place in the basement of an abandoned textile factory, against a 22-year-old man named Rico who outweighed her by 60 pounds and had 3 years of boxing experience. The crowd was small but vocal, consisting mainly of other fighters, local gamblers, and Santos's associates who wanted to evaluate this new prospect. The fight lasted 2 rounds. Rico dominated the first round using his reach and power advantages, landing several hard punches that would have stopped most opponents. But Zara's conditioning from Master Chen's brutal training allowed her to absorb the punishment while studying her opponent's patterns and timing. In the second round, she began using her superior footwork and speed to avoid his power shots while landing precise counterattacks to his body and legs. The finish came when Rico, frustrated by his inability to land clean shots, rushed forward with a wild combination. Zara sidestepped his charge and swept his lead leg with her bare foot, sending him off balance. As he tried to recover, she followed up with a knee strike to his midsection that dropped him to the canvas gasping for air. The crowd's reaction was mixed, surprise, admiration, and skepticism all rolled into one. They had just witnessed a teenager defeat an experienced adult fighter using techniques they had never seen before. Some spectators demanded immediate rematches, claiming Rico had been lucky or unprepared. Others began discussing potential opponents and betting odds for future fights. After her debut victory against Rico, Zara found herself caught in the strange purgatory that existed between recognition and respect in the underground fighting world. Word of the barefoot teenager who could defeat grown men spread quickly through Neo-Bangkok's criminal networks, but with that attention came both opportunities and dangers she hadn't anticipated. Santos became her informal manager, booking fights and negotiating purses while taking a percentage of her earnings. He understood the entertainment value of her unique fighting style and appearance, but he also recognized the legitimate skill that backed up the novelty. Within 3 months, Zara had compiled a record of 7 wins against increasingly difficult opponents, each victory more convincing than the last. The progression of opponents told the story of her rapid ascent through the ranks. After Rico came Yamamoto, a former karate competitor who had been banned from sanctioned events for excessive aggression. Then Petrov, a Russian immigrant with military combat training and a reputation for ending fights with brutal ground-and-pound attacks. Each fighter brought different challenges that forced Zara to expand her arsenal and adapt her techniques. Against Yamamoto, she learned to deal with traditional martial arts techniques that had been modified for no-rules competition. His precise kicks and rigid combinations were initially difficult to counter, but Zara discovered that his adherence to formal patterns made him predictable. She began mixing her grandmother's dancing movements with Master Chen's fighting techniques, creating flows that looked like performance art but carried devastating combat effectiveness. The victory over Petrov was perhaps her most important, as it established her credentials against a truly dangerous opponent. The Russian's strategy was simple: take the fight to the ground where his size and strength advantages would be decisive. He succeeded in getting the takedown early in the first round, mounting Zara and beginning the kind of punishing ground attack that had hospitalized several previous opponents. But Zara's barefoot training provided unexpected advantages even in this position. Her feet could grip and push against surfaces in ways that shoes would never allow, giving her leverage to create space and eventually reverse position. When Petrov tried to pin her legs with his body weight, she used her toes to grip his clothing and throw him off balance. The fight ended when she trapped him in a submission hold that combined traditional jiu-jitsu with flexibility training from her grandmother's dance lessons. These early victories established Zara's reputation, but they also created new problems. Other female fighters in the circuit began viewing her as a threat to their earning potential, leading to challenges that were as much about politics as combat. Male fighters, meanwhile, were increasingly reluctant to face her, claiming that fighting a woman would damage their reputation regardless of the outcome. The breakthrough came when Chen Wei, one of the circuit's most respected promoters, offered her a spot in a major tournament featuring 8 fighters competing for a substantial cash prize. The event would be held in an upscale private club, with wealthy spectators betting enormous sums on the outcomes. This was the level of competition Zara had been working toward, but it also meant facing opponents who fought professionally in various legitimate and illegitimate venues. Her first tournament opponent was Abdullah the Desert Storm Hassan, a Moroccan fighter with extensive kickboxing experience and a reputation for devastating leg kicks. The matchup was particularly challenging because Hassan specifically requested to fight the barefoot girl, claiming he wanted to teach her why proper protective equipment was necessary in serious competition. The fight began with Hassan immediately targeting Zara's unprotected feet and shins with powerful kicks, designed to break bones and end the contest quickly. His strategy was sound. Most fighters would have been crippled within the first minute of such an assault. But Zara's years of conditioning had turned her feet and legs into weapons as hard as baseball bats, and Hassan's kicks were having less effect than he expected. More problematically for Hassan, each failed leg kick left him momentarily off balance, creating openings that Zara exploited with precise counterattacks. Her bare feet allowed her to change direction instantly, sliding and pivoting in ways that confused his timing and made his powerful strikes miss their intended targets. The finish came in the second round when Hassan, frustrated by his ineffective leg kick strategy, switched to boxing combinations aimed at her head. Zara ducked under a particularly vicious hook and drove her knee into his liver with surgical precision. Hassan collapsed immediately, his body shutting down from the perfectly placed strike. The crowd's reaction was electric. These weren't casual spectators from neighborhood markets, these were serious gamblers and fight fans who understood what they had just witnessed. A teenage girl had not only survived against a seasoned professional but had dominated him using techniques that defied conventional wisdom about combat sports. In the tournament's semifinals, Zara faced her most technically skilled opponent yet, Jin Watanabe, a former professional mixed martial artist who had been forced underground after testing positive for performance-enhancing drugs. Jin represented everything that modern fighting had become: scientifically trained, technically perfect, and equipped with every advantage that money and technology could provide. The contrast between the two fighters was stark. Jin wore custom-fitted gloves, professional-grade mouthguards, and specialized fight shorts designed for optimal performance. His corner consisted of multiple coaches with laptops tracking his biometric data and analyzing his opponent's patterns in real time. Everything about his preparation screamed modern professionalism. Zara stood across from him with nothing but her bare hands, bare feet, and hard-earned experience. The betting odds heavily favored Jin, but something in Zara's demeanor suggested that the smartest money might be on the underdog once again. The semi-final match against Jin Watanabe represented more than just another fight for Zara. It was a clash between two completely different philosophies of combat. Jin embodied everything modern about mixed martial arts, scientific training methods, advanced nutrition, cutting-edge recovery techniques, and equipment designed to maximize every possible advantage. His preparation for their fight had included weeks of video analysis, sparring with female training partners to simulate Zara's movement patterns, and even consultation with sports psychologists about the mental challenges of fighting an unconventional opponent. Zara's preparation, by contrast, consisted of meditation with Master Chen, long barefoot runs through the city streets, and traditional conditioning exercises that hadn't changed in centuries. Where Jin spent hours analyzing fight footage and developing game plans, Zara focused on being present in the moment and trusting her instincts. The fight itself began with Jin attempting to implement a systematic approach designed to neutralize Zara's unorthodox advantages. He maintained careful distance, used technical footwork to control the center of the fighting area, and threw precise combinations that showcased his superior formal training. For the first 10 minutes, his strategy appeared to be working perfectly. But Zara was studying him as much as he was trying to dominate her. She noticed that his technical perfection came with predictable patterns, combinations that always followed the same sequences, defensive movements that relied on timing rather than adaptation, and footwork that prioritized form over functionality. Jin fought like a textbook, which meant that once you understood the textbook, you could predict the next chapter. The turning point came when Jin attempted a perfectly executed takedown, shooting for Zara's legs with the kind of technique that would have impressed any wrestling coach. But as he committed to the attack, Zara's bare feet allowed her to feel his approach through vibrations in the floor. She sprawled backward just enough to make him miss, then used her natural balance to pivot and strike him in the back of the head as his momentum carried him past her. Jin recovered quickly. His conditioning and experience were legitimate advantages, but the missed takedown had disrupted his game plan and forced him to improvise. This was where Zara's street fighting experience became crucial. While Jin had trained extensively in controlled environments with predictable opponents, Zara had learned to adapt to chaotic situations where survival depended on split-second decisions and creative solutions. The next 20 minutes became a masterclass in adaptation versus preparation. Every time Jin established a rhythm, Zara changed the tempo. When he tried to control distance, she moved in ways that made his measurements irrelevant. When he attempted to use his strength advantages, she redirected his force in directions he hadn't anticipated. The finish came suddenly and beautifully. Jin threw a combination that had worked successfully in dozens of previous fights, a jab cross hook sequence designed to set up another takedown attempt. But Zara slipped the jab by millimeters, ducked under the cross completely, and stepped inside the hook to deliver an uppercut that caught Jin perfectly under the chin. The impact lifted him off his feet briefly before he crashed to the canvas, unconscious before he hit the ground. The crowd erupted in a way that surprised even Santos, who had been promoting underground fights for over a decade. These weren't casual spectators cheering for an upset. These were knowledgeable fight fans recognizing that they had witnessed something truly special. A teenage girl with no formal professional training had just defeated a former elite-level athlete using nothing but intelligence, adaptability, and techniques that predated modern martial arts by centuries. But the real shock came during the post-fight interviews, when several spectators approached Santos about arranging private matches with Zara. These weren't typical underground fighting requests. These were wealthy individuals who collected experiences the way others collected art, and they were willing to pay enormous sums to witness something they had never seen before. Chen Wei, the tournament promoter, immediately recognized the business opportunity. "She's not just a fighter," he explained to Santos while watching Zara's post-fight medical check. "She's a phenomenon. People will pay premium prices to see her compete, whether they're rooting for her or against her. But we need to be careful about how we develop this opportunity." The tournament final was scheduled for the following week, against whoever emerged victorious from the other semi-final between two seasoned professionals.
But more importantly, win or lose, the final would determine whether Zara had truly arrived as a legitimate force in the underground fighting world, or whether her previous victories had been fortunate flukes against unprepared opponents. The week between fights passed in a blur of interview requests, training sessions, and strategic planning. News of the barefoot teenager who was dominating professional fighters had begun spreading beyond the underground circuit, attracting attention from sports bloggers, martial arts instructors, and even some mainstream media outlets interested in unconventional human interest stories. Master Chen used this time to help Zara prepare mentally for the pressure and expectations that came with sudden fame. Fighting is simple, he reminded her during one of their final training sessions. Everything else, the crowd, the money, the attention, the fear, these are just distractions. Remember your feet, trust your training, and stay present in the moment.
The tournament final took place on a humid Saturday night in August in the ballroom of an abandoned luxury hotel that had been converted into Neo-Bangkok's most exclusive underground fighting venue. The crowd was larger than any Zara had previously faced, consisting of wealthy thrill-seekers, criminal organization leaders, professional gamblers, and martial arts enthusiasts who had traveled from across Southeast Asia specifically to witness the barefoot phenomenon in action. Her opponent was Viktor the Butcher Kozlov, a Ukrainian fighter with a reputation that preceded him like a dark cloud. Kozlov had originally been scheduled to fight in the other semi-final, but his opponent had withdrawn after suffering what appeared to be a mysterious training injury. Rumors suggested that the withdrawal hadn't been voluntary, and that Kozlov's associates had made it clear that losing in the semi-finals would be unhealthy for everyone involved. Standing across from Kozlov, Zara understood immediately that this fight would be different from everything that had come before. Where her previous opponents had brought skill, experience, or tactical advantages, Kozlov brought something more primal and dangerous, the absolute willingness to inflict serious injury without hesitation or remorse. His 6'3" frame carried 220 pounds of muscle and scar tissue, and his eyes held the kind of emptiness that suggested he viewed violence as simply another tool for achieving his goals. The betting had shifted dramatically in the days leading up to the final. While early odds had favored Zara based on her tournament performance, late money was pouring in on Kozlov as stories about his background circulated through the gambling community. Word was that he had competed in underground fights across Eastern Europe and Russia, with a record that included several opponents who had required extended hospital stays, and at least 2 who had never returned to competition. Chen Wei addressed the crowd before the fight, building anticipation while carefully avoiding any mention of the controversy surrounding Kozlov's semi-final victory. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you will witness a clash between old and new, tradition and innovation, finesse and power. In one corner, we have the barefoot warrior, who has captured the imagination of fight fans across the region. In the other, we have a veteran competitor whose reputation speaks for itself. The fight began with Kozlov immediately establishing his intentions. Rather than testing Zara's reactions or feeling out her timing, he launched an aggressive assault designed to overwhelm her through sheer physical dominance. His strategy was brutally simple: close the distance, eliminate her mobility advantages, and end the fight through superior size and strength. For the first few minutes the strategy appeared to be working. Kozlov's relentless pressure forced Zara to fight defensively, using her footwork and evasion skills just to avoid serious damage. His punches carried enough power to end the fight with any clean connection, and his wrestling background allowed him to neutralize many of her counter-attacking opportunities. But Zara had faced pressure fighters before, and she understood that Kozlov's aggressive approach came with inherent weaknesses. His wild swings created openings that more technical fighters would never allow, and his reliance on brute force meant that he was expending enormous amounts of energy with each failed attack. More importantly, his emotional commitment to violence was making him predictable in ways that tactical fighters were not. The turning point came midway through the first round when Kozlov attempted to corner Zara against the boundary of the fighting area. As he rushed forward with a combination designed to trap her, Zara used her bare feet to grip the smooth floor and change direction at an angle that Kozlov hadn't anticipated. His momentum carried him past her, and she landed a precise kick to his kidney that visibly staggered him. For the first time in the fight, Kozlov showed uncertainty. The kick had been harder than anything he had expected from someone of Zara's size, and it had landed with surgical precision in a spot that would cause lasting pain throughout the remainder of the contest. More troubling for him was the realization that his opponent was not intimidated by his reputation or overwhelmed by his aggression. The second round became a masterclass in adaptation and patience. Zara began systematically targeting Kozlov's legs and body, using her superior conditioning and footwork to land strikes while avoiding his increasingly desperate counterattacks. Her bare feet allowed her to pivot and slide in ways that confused his timing, while her precise targeting gradually accumulated damage that was sapping his strength and slowing his reactions. Kozlov's corner began shouting instructions in Russian, urging him to increase his aggression and finish the fight quickly. But their advice only made his situation worse, as his wild attacks were creating more opportunities for Zara to counter effectively. By the end of the second round, he was breathing heavily and showing signs of frustration that bordered on panic. The third round lasted less than 2 minutes. Kozlov, desperate to change the momentum, attempted a takedown that left him vulnerable to a knee strike. Zara's counter was perfectly timed and devastatingly effective, catching him under the jaw and sending him to the canvas unconscious. The fight was over, and the crowd exploded in a mixture of disbelief and appreciation for what they had just witnessed. But the real drama began after the official result was announced. As Zara was being interviewed by the event's informal media team, several of Kozlov's associates approached the fighting area with expressions that suggested the evening's entertainment was far from over. Santos immediately moved to intercept them, while Chen Wei began coordinating with his security team to ensure that the celebration didn't turn into something more dangerous. The confrontation that followed would ultimately prove more significant than the fight itself, as it marked Zara's transition from underground fighting phenomenon to someone who had attracted the attention of serious criminal organizations. The celebration following Zara's tournament victory was short-lived. As she stood in the makeshift winner's circle accepting congratulations from promoters and spectators, a group of stern-faced men in expensive suits approached the fighting area with purposeful strides. Their leader was Anton Volkov, Viktor Kozlov's financial backer and a significant figure in Neo-Bangkok's Russian organized crime community. Volkov's involvement in underground fighting extended far beyond simple entertainment or gambling. His fighters served multiple purposes. They generated revenue through betting and prize winnings, they provided muscle for various business operations, and they served as symbols of his organization's power and reach. Viktor Kozlov had been more than just another competitor. He was Volkov's primary enforcer and a walking advertisement for the consequences of opposing Russian interests in the city. That was an impressive performance, Volkov said as he approached Zara, his English heavily accented but perfectly clear. His tone was conversational, almost friendly, but everyone within earshot recognized the underlying threat. My associate will require some time to recover from your techniques. Perhaps we should discuss how you might put those skills to more profitable use. Santos stepped between them immediately, understanding that this conversation could determine whether Zara's fighting career continued or ended permanently. Mr. Volkov, I'm sure you understand that Zara is focused on her athletic development right now. She's not interested in business opportunities outside of competitive fighting, but Volkov's attention remained fixed on Zara herself, studying her reaction to his implied offer. Criminal organizations were always recruiting talented individuals who could provide useful services, and a fighter capable of defeating their best enforcer would certainly qualify as useful. The fact that she was young and potentially impressionable made her even more valuable as a long-term investment. I think the young lady can speak for herself, Volkov continued, his voice carrying the kind of authority that suggested disagreement would be unwise. There are opportunities in this city for someone with your abilities, legitimate business ventures that could provide steady income and professional development, much more reliable than depending on tournament prizes and gambling revenues. Zara understood the subtext perfectly. This wasn't a job offer, it was a recruitment attempt wrapped in polite language. Volkov was essentially asking her to choose between working for his organization or potentially finding herself on the wrong end of their business operations. The underground fighting world had always existed in the gray areas between legitimate competition and criminal enterprise, but this was her first direct encounter with the darker side of that relationship. I appreciate your interest, Zara replied carefully, but I'm committed to my current training and competition schedule. Fighting is my passion, not my business. Her response was diplomatic but firm, acknowledging Volkov's status while making her position clear. The tension in the room was immediately apparent to everyone present. Other spectators began moving toward the exits, understanding that they were witnessing the kind of conversation that could turn dangerous quickly. Chen Wei's security team positioned themselves strategically around the fighting area, while Santos remained close to Zara in case the situation escalated. Volkov's expression didn't change, but his associates shifted positions in ways that suggested they were prepared for the conversation to become more than verbal. "Passion is admirable," he said finally, "but passion without proper guidance can lead to unfortunate circumstances. The fighting world is dangerous, especially for young people who don't understand all the risks involved." The threat was now explicit, though still wrapped in language that could be interpreted as concern rather than intimidation. Zara felt her heart rate increase, not from fear but from the recognition that her fighting success had brought her into contact with forces that operated by completely different rules than anything she had previously encountered. Master Chen, who had been watching from the corner, chose this moment to intervene. His approach was subtle but effective. Rather than confronting Volkov directly, he began speaking to Zara in Japanese, using formal language that indicated respect for her autonomy and decision-making authority. The implication was clear: Zara was not alone, and any attempt to pressure or harm her would have consequences beyond what Volkov might immediately anticipate. Perhaps this conversation would be better continued at another time, Chen suggested smoothly, switching to English while maintaining his protective positioning. "Tonight is for celebrating athletic achievement, not discussing business arrangements." Volkov studied the dynamics around him for several long seconds, calculating whether pursuing this conversation further would be worth the potential complications. Finally, he nodded toward Chen Wei and began moving toward the exit with his associates. But his parting words carried a promise rather than a conclusion. "Enjoy your celebration," he said to Zara. "But remember that talent like yours attracts attention from many different sources. Some of that attention will be more persistent than others." After Volkov's departure, the remaining crowd gradually returned to their conversations and celebrations, but the mood had permanently shifted. What had begun as a victory party had become a reminder that success in the underground fighting world came with risks that extended far beyond physical injury during competition. Santos immediately began making plans for enhanced security during Zara's training and travel, while Chen Wei started exploring options for relocating future events to venues with better protection against unwanted interference. But everyone understood that Volkov's interest represented a long-term problem that wouldn't be solved through simple security measures. In the weeks following her tournament victory and the confrontation with Volkov, Zara found herself at the center of a storm that extended far beyond the underground fighting world. Word of the Barefoot teenager who had defeated professional fighters had reached mainstream media outlets, leading to interview requests, documentary proposals, and offers from legitimate martial arts organizations who wanted to understand her unconventional methods. But with increased visibility came increased danger. Volkov's organization had not forgotten their interest in recruiting her, and their methods of persuasion were becoming more direct and threatening. Santos reported that his apartment had been broken into, though nothing was stolen, clearly a message that Zara's support network was being monitored and could be targeted if necessary. Master Chen's dojo experienced similar intimidation tactics. Students arrived for classes to find the front door vandalized with threatening messages in Russian, and neighborhood contacts reported seeing unfamiliar men watching the building during training hours. Chen himself seemed unperturbed by these developments, but he quietly began varying his daily routines and implementing security measures that suggested he understood the seriousness of the situation. The breaking point came when Zara's mother received a phone call at work, ostensibly from a potential employer offering her a much better job with significantly higher pay. When Keiko mentioned the offer to her daughter, Zara immediately recognized it as another recruitment attempt. Volkov's organization was essentially offering to improve her family's financial situation in exchange for her cooperation. "They're trying to buy my compliance through you,"
Zara explained to her mother during a tense conversation in their small apartment. If I start working for them, they'll follow through on their promises. If I continue refusing, they'll probably make sure you lose your current jobs and can't find new ones. This realization forced Zara to confront a difficult truth. Her fighting success had not only changed her own life but had placed everyone she cared about in potential danger. The skills that had seemed like a path to independence and respect had instead made her a target for people who viewed violence as a business tool rather than a sporting competition. The solution came from an unexpected source. Chen Wei approached Santos with a proposal that would either resolve the Volkov situation permanently or escalate it to a level that could prove fatal for everyone involved. One of Neo Bangkok's most notorious crime bosses, a Thai businessman named Kun Chai, had expressed interest in organizing a special event that would pit Zara against Volkov's new champion, a Mongolian fighter named Batbayer, who had recently arrived in the city with credentials that were both impressive and terrifying. Batbayer's background was the stuff of underground fighting legend. He had allegedly trained with traditional Mongolian warriors in the steppes before transitioning to modern mixed martial arts, where he had compiled an undefeated record in various illegal competitions across Asia. More relevantly for the current situation, he was rumored to be personally loyal to Volkov and had been brought to Neo Bangkok specifically to address the problem that Zara represented. The proposed fight would be different from anything Zara had previously experienced. Rather than taking place in a warehouse or converted ballroom, it would be held in a private compound outside the city, with an audience consisting primarily of high-level criminal organization leaders and their associates. The purse would be substantial enough to set up Zara and her family for life, but the stakes would extend far beyond money. This isn't just about fighting anymore, Santos explained during a strategy meeting at Master Chen's dojo. Volkov has made this personal, and the only way to end his interest permanently is to demonstrate that pursuing you costs more than it's worth. Defeating his champion publicly, in front of other organization leaders, would send that message clearly. Master Chen was characteristically direct in his assessment of the situation. You have reached the point where avoiding conflict is no longer possible. The question now is whether you face this challenge on your terms or theirs. Fighting Batbayer in a controlled environment with witnesses who understand the implications gives you the best chance of ending this situation definitively. But Zara understood that accepting this fight meant crossing a line from which there might be no return. Win or lose, she would be definitively marking herself as someone willing to engage with serious criminal organizations on their terms. The barefoot teenager who had started fighting to protect herself and her community would be transformed into a player in games where the consequences of failure extended far beyond personal defeat. The decision ultimately came down to a conversation with her mother, who had watched her daughter's journey from street fights to underground tournaments with a mixture of pride and growing concern. Keiko understood better than anyone that Zara's fighting ability had always been about more than sport or competition. It was about survival in a world that offered few alternatives for people from their background. You didn't choose this situation, Keiko said as they sat together on their apartment's small balcony, looking out over the sprawling slums that had shaped both their lives. But you have chosen how to respond to it. Whatever you decide, I trust your judgment and I'll support your choice. That night, Zara called Santos and gave him her answer. She would face Batbayer, but only under conditions that reflected her values and fighting philosophy. The match would be held according to traditional rules: no weapons, no interference from either fighter's associates, and no predetermined outcome regardless of the betting or organizational politics involved. The compound where Zara would face Batbayer was located 2 hours outside Neo Bangkok, surrounded by dense jungle and accessible only through a single guarded road that prevented uninvited visitors or police interference. The venue itself was a modern coliseum built specifically for private events, featuring a regulation-sized fighting area surrounded by tiered seating that could accommodate several hundred spectators in luxury that rivaled professional sports arenas. On the night of the fight, the audience represented a who's who of Southeast Asian organized crime, legitimate business leaders whose operations existed in legal gray areas, and wealthy thrill seekers who collected unique experiences. The betting pool had reached astronomical levels, with some individual wagers reportedly exceeding what most people earned in a lifetime. Bat Bear emerged from his preparation area looking like something from ancient mythology, 6'2" inches of muscle and bone forged by traditional training methods that emphasized functional strength over aesthetic appearance. His shaved head bore intricate tattoos that told the story of his victories across multiple countries and fighting. Most intimidating of all were his eyes, which held the same emptiness that Zara had seen in Kozlov but magnified by years of additional violence and conditioning. The Mongolian fighter was everything that Volkov's organization needed him to be: technically skilled, physically imposing, and psychologically prepared to inflict whatever damage was necessary to achieve victory. His warm-up routine demonstrated flexibility and power that would have impressed Olympic-level athletes, while his demeanor suggested that he viewed the upcoming contest as just another day's work. Zara stood across from him wearing her traditional simple shorts and tank top, her bare feet planted firmly on the specially textured fighting surface that had been installed to accommodate her unusual requirements. The contrast between the two fighters was stark: ancient tradition versus modern brutality, minimalist preparation versus technological enhancement, spiritual grounding versus calculated violence. Kun Chai addressed the crowd before the fight, emphasizing the historic nature of what they were about to witness while carefully avoiding any mention of the organizational politics that had led to this moment. Tonight you will see two completely different approaches to combat, each representing philosophies that have been tested in the crucible of real violence. May the superior warrior prevail. The fight began with Bat Bear immediately implementing a strategy designed to neutralize Zara's mobility advantages. Rather than pursuing her around the fighting area, he controlled the center space and forced her to come to him, using his superior reach to land strikes while avoiding the close-range exchanges where her speed and precision were most effective. For the first round, his approach was largely successful. Bat Bear's technical training allowed him to maintain distance while landing scoring blows, and his power was evident each time his strikes connected. Zara found herself fighting defensively for longer periods than in any previous contest, using her evasion skills to avoid serious damage while searching for openings that seemed increasingly rare. But Zara was studying more than just Bat Bear's fighting techniques. She was analyzing his breathing patterns, his recovery time between exchanges, and the subtle tells that indicated when he was preparing to launch specific attacks. Most importantly, she was testing his reactions to different types of pressure and movement, gradually building a mental map of his capabilities and limitations. The second round began with Zara implementing a strategy that no previous opponent had prepared Bat Bear to face. Instead of trying to match his technical precision or overwhelming his defenses through aggression, she began using her bare feet to change the texture and dynamics of the fighting surface itself. By pivoting and sliding in specific patterns, Zara began creating small amounts of moisture and debris that affected traction in barely perceptible but tactically significant ways. Bat Bear, wearing traditional fighting shoes, found his footwork becoming less reliable as the round progressed, while Zara's bare feet adapted instantly to the changing conditions. The shift in momentum was gradual but undeniable. As Bat Bear's footing became less certain, his striking accuracy decreased and his movement became more labored. Zara began finding openings for counterattacks that hadn't existed in the first round, landing precise strikes to his body and legs that accumulated damage without creating obvious visual evidence of her success. The third round was when Master Chen's years of unconventional training philosophy finally revealed its ultimate purpose. Every meditation session that had taught Zara to stay present under pressure, every conditioning exercise that had strengthened her feet and legs beyond normal human limits, every sparring session against multiple opponents that had forced her to think creatively rather than rely on predetermined techniques, all of it culminated in a performance that transcended conventional fighting and became something approaching art. Zara began moving in patterns that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Her bare feet gripped and released the fighting surface with perfect timing, allowing her to change direction at angles that Bat Bear couldn't predict or counter. Her strikes came from positions that traditional training had never anticipated, targeting nerve points and pressure areas that created pain without visible damage. The finish came suddenly and beautifully. Barefoot, frustrated by his inability to establish dominance, launched a powerful combination designed to end the fight through sheer force. But Zara slipped under his attack and drove her knee into his solar plexus with surgical precision, targeting the exact spot where accumulated body shots had weakened his defense. Barefoot collapsed to the fighting surface, conscious but unable to continue. The crowd erupted in a mixture of disbelief and appreciation, understanding that they had witnessed something truly extraordinary. More importantly for Zara's long-term safety, they had seen Volkov's supposedly unbeatable champion defeated decisively by a teenage girl, using techniques that no amount of money or intimidation could replicate. In the aftermath of her victory, as Zara stood in the center of the fighting area acknowledging the crowd's applause, she understood that everything had changed. She was no longer the barefoot teenager from Riverside District who fought to survive. She was the barefoot warrior who had proven that strength came in forms that traditional power structures couldn't understand or control. Volkov approached her during the post-fight ceremony, but his demeanor was completely different from their previous encounter. "You have my respect," he said simply, "and my organization's understanding that your path and ours need not intersect." The threat that had hung over her family for months was finally lifted, but more than that, Zara had discovered something about herself that went beyond fighting or competition. She had learned that true strength came not from defeating opponents, but from staying true to your principles even when the entire world seemed determined to make you compromise them. As she left the compound that night, her bare feet touching the earth beneath the star-filled sky, Zara knew that her journey was just beginning. The barefoot warrior had been born not from a single fight, but from a lifetime of choosing the difficult path over the easy one, the authentic path over the convenient one. They had said she couldn't fight, but standing there in the darkness, surrounded by the sounds of the jungle, and the respect of those who had witnessed her victory, Zara Nakamura knew that she had proven something far more important, that anyone willing to stand on their own ground, in their own truth with their own authentic strength, could face any challenge the world might offer. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from